Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Serious topic? Let's do it. What's the creepiest experience that's ever happened to you or someone you know? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One of my good friends noticed over the course of a few months that a lot of her bras and underwear had gone missing, like much more than anyone would expect to just misplace. It continued on for about 6 months or so, when she and her husband finally decided to change the locks on their doors. She never had a pair go missing after that. One time I was pumping gas and was approached by a couple who said they needed a ride. Their car had broken down, and they needed to go about a mile up the road to get to their friend's work. Their destination is on my way, so I agreed to take them. I pull out my phone and say half-jokingly, "Okay, well, I'm just going to send a picture of you guys to my friends to make sure you don't rob me or something, haha." They simultaneously turn and walk away. They don't say a word. I yell out, "Hey, you're going the wrong way to your destination." The man flips me the bird and they keep walking, neither to where they said their car was nor where they wanted to go. When I was a kid into my teens, I'd go to church camp in the Big Bear Mountains in Southern California. We had a blast, and one of the best things to do were the raids on the cabins of the opposite sex, always in the middle of the night. Teen sexual tension, you know. The cabins were situated so that the main sleeping lodges were in a lower elevation, while the bathroom, shower cabins were up the hill about 50 yards away. The boys initiated the first night's attack, and each night we'd go back and forth, spooking one another or trying to, definitely trying to catch one another in the act. Lots of chasing and hoping you wouldn't or would, if you know what I mean, get caught by whomever you had a crush on. Tons of sexy time fun for 13-year-olds. The last year I was there, the girls had a brilliant idea to run to the bathrooms after our raid, instead of back to our cabin. We snuck out very late, did our shenanigans, and then a posse of 3 girls and I made the dash to the bathrooms. I ran ahead of them all, but I could hear them behind me, and when I got to the loo, I plunged through the door and waited for them to follow suit. No one came. I waited and waited, expecting them to show at any moment for the next half hour or so. They never did. Finally, I cautiously peered out, saw no one, and walked back down to the cabin. I was pissed. When I got there, it was not only the girls, but the boys, our counselors, and the head counselor. They hadn't woken up the director just yet. When I entered the room, they all stared at me, ashen-faced, as if they'd just seen a ghost. I was pretty annoyed and asked them all what happened, but thought at this point we're in a lot of trouble. Everyone stammered and said, "Are you okay? Oh my God, are you okay?" Perplexed, I said of course I was, and asked what's the deal. I heard them running behind me, but then they were no-shows. What gives? My BFF at the time said, "We didn't run up the hill after you. When you took off running, we saw you, and you were being chased by a bear. We thought you were dead." About 10 years earlier, 2 different girls were eaten by bears in Glacier National Park in the same night, and it was something we talked about often around the campfire. My mom was at a tailgate party when she was in her early teens. She said this weird guy showed up, drank with her and her friends, and gave her and her friend a ride home. They both realized that he wasn't driving them to where they had both asked to be driven to. He was asking them a lot of inappropriate questions, and my mom got sketched out. He made some kind of comment about my mom being too tall for him to take. She had no idea what that meant, but she had a signal with her friend when something weird was happening and my mom gave it. Both my mom and her friend requested to be let the F out of the car. He wouldn't let them out, but he did slow down, so both of them jumped out of the car and ran. Years and years later, she was watching the news and recognized the guy who gave her a ride as Clifford Olson, an effing serial killer. Her friend called her and said, "That's an effing weird guy who tried to drive us home that one night." It was a hot summer, and I'd returned home after my shift in the local pub. I had a habit of going up to the bedroom, turning my light out, opening the window, and staring out into the small garden just to wind down, really. My bedroom window was a large fire escape window, which backed onto a flat roof garage, so an emergency escape was easy. I'd go into the habit of sleeping with it left open. This one night I'd been staring into the garden at the silhouettes of the small trees and bushes for at least 5 minutes, when all of a sudden, the shape I'd been looking at moved and darted away. I'd actually been staring right at a man who'd been looking right up at me. Large footprints regularly appeared in the garden after that, and I never slept with the fire escape window open again. The doorbell rang late at night around 1 a.m. while I was watching TV. I went upstairs and looked out the window on the side of the door. Nobody was there. Rang again. I was freaked out and waited a bit, then stretched up and looked through a window at the top of the door, and there was someone pressed up against the door, huddled in the corner. I freaked and stood still for a minute. I looked up again, and I saw a hooded person running away from the house down the street. Little late, but I'll tell my story. I was bouncing for a local strip club in Missouri around 2008. Boss gave me some money and sent me to go get some things from Walmart around midnight. On the way to Walmart, on a pretty empty Highway 50, I noticed a figure stumbling along the road. I stopped out of curiosity and rolled my window down when she approached. When I asked her if she needed a ride, she looked frightened and could barely speak. I unlocked the door and she got in. After she sat down, a van pulled over behind me. Thinking it might be someone she knew, I asked her who it was. She was starting to cry and couldn't make out any words. Just then a man from the van appeared at the window that was still down. He grabbed her through the window and started yelling at me to mind my own business. Told me not to believe a word she says. She's screaming and freaking out now. In the confusion, I locked the truck doors, and in my best tough guy voice, I explained to the guy she's with me, and I'm taking her wherever she wants to go. I told him if he wants, he can follow me, but she's not getting out of my truck until she gets where she wants. He cusses some more and walks back to the van. I pull back onto 50, and she starts to tell the story. That man and his friends had taken her to a field and had their way until she played dead. They tossed her in the back of the van when they were done. When they stopped at the gas station, she jumped out and ran across the highway where I found her. I told her I was taking her to the cops. She agreed at first, but she began to get nervous again and said no cops. So I explained that I can take her to the cops or the hospital, but that's it. I dropped her off at the emergency room. I'll never forget how she looked in the light. She was panicked but relieved. I watched her walk through the doors and the security guard began to help her. I left, got some shit from my boss, and went back to the club. Never saw the van or the girl again. Hope she's okay. Well, that's a case of right place and right time, and you did everything you could for her. Hopefully everything ended up well. Shame you couldn't follow up, but you got her to a place where she could get help, so hopefully it did. My mom worked at Tampa General Hospital in the 1980s on the graveyard shift with like 4 other women and 1 guy. In 1984, a serial killer started a spree during the summer, and his victims were young women. I think they were later discovered to be prostitutes. My mom and her coworkers were all in their 20s at the time, so after one of the murders made the news again, they got really nervous about having to walk back to their cars at the end of their shift in the middle of the night. So the one male coworker, Bobby Joe Long, walked them to the parking garage, my mom included. A few weeks later, Long was arrested and charged with all the murders after one of his intended victims escaped. So yeah, that one's a little freaky. This happened several years ago to my brother. I don't know if it's creepy or just horrific. My brother had 2 roommates, one female and a 2-year-old son, and the other male roommate. My brother worked late nights. I believe he was a cook at the time. They came home late one night from work. Everyone was in bed out for the night. There was a guy that didn't live there in the kitchen. He had no shirt on and was using the sink. Looked like he was washing up. It was the girl's estranged boyfriend. He was also the father of the 2-year-old. Nothing seemed odd to my brother since this was in and out of his roommate's life all the time. Plus, it was an extra hot summer night. The no-shirt thing wasn't a red flag either. He said hi to my brother, told him he was just washing up and was going to hit the road. He finished up and left. The other roommate got up after he left and came out. I think he heard them talking or something. I don't remember how it went. They got to talking about how it was odd that guy was in the kitchen like that. They decided to go ask the female roommate if everything was okay. When they knocked on the door, she didn't answer, so they slowly opened the door to check on her. It was a bloodbath in her room. The boyfriend had beaten her and the little boy with a board. She was obviously dead. My brother tried to revive the little guy. Sadly, he didn't make it. They caught the guy in a day or 2. I think he pled guilty and is now in prison for life. Not my story, but my high school arts teacher. When she was younger, she was walking back to her car after going grocery shopping, and a young man approached her asking for her to help him put his groceries in his car because he was injured. She politely said she couldn't and gave some excuse. The real reason she said no was because the hairs on the back of her neck stood up and something inside of her was telling her that something wasn't quite right. Well, a few weeks later, there's a picture of that man on the news, and that man was none other than Ted Bundy. TLDR, my art teacher was approached by Ted Bundy at a grocery store. When I was a kid, my grandparents lived in a split-level house. I used to spend the night there a lot. One time when I was 12, I was spending the night. It was late, and my grandpa was working, and my grandma had to run to the store. I was there alone, laying on the couch downstairs near the base of the stairs. It was summer, kind of a nice night, and Grandma left the front door open with just the screen door closed. After I heard her pull down the driveway, I hear someone walk up the porch steps, across the porch, open the screen door, and then run upstairs. The footsteps then ran back down the stairs, stopping for a moment at the landing and then racing down the steps to the family room. I lifted my head expecting to see a family member, but there was nobody. The stairs ended 3 feet from my head, and there should have been someone there, but no. I freaked, covered my head with the blanket, and stayed like that until Grandma got home. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbor's kid. His name was Alex. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had in the corner of my room facing the window. He would play for hours, staying preoccupied while my brother and I would play video games in the living room. So one night, when I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting, my brother came to me and said, "Alex is under your bed and shaking." I asked what's wrong with him. My brother told me to follow him into the room and try to talk him back out from under the bed. I go inside to find him on the verge of tears as he was trembling profusely under my bed. I asked Alice, "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" Alex whimpered, "Him," while looking at my sliding closet. As I walked toward the bed in order to help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now, my parents were out to dinner with his, and he explained the whole story in detail to both his parents and mine. His explanation sent shivers down my spine when my brother and I left the house to meet up with his parents and find out what happened. My mom told me that Alex was playing with my Legos and heard a slight murmur from my closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of "come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed the closet had a slight opening with light peering in from my lamp. He stared at the crack until he saw an eyelid open. He told us that there was a man in my closet. Alex then hid under my bed after he gave out a slight yelp, which attracted my brother's attention. My family rushes back into my house and into my room. In horror, we find my closet door rocked open and a few things missing. My window had been left open when it was previously closed, and a few things knocked over which had not been touched previously. We still don't know what force we were reckoning after that evening. Thank God nothing more severe happened. When I was 4, I had an ongoing obsession with Silly the cat. My family didn't have a cat, especially not a Siamese. It was purely in my imagination. I drew pictures of Silly, talked to Silly, dreamed of Silly, made a space on my pillow for Silly to sleep on, had empty food dishes on the floor for Silly, and drove everybody effing mad with Silly. One day, we went to a theme park sort of place, and for hours straight, my parents had to listen to my talk about Silly, how Silly was waiting in a box for me to come get her so we could go home. This is the bit my mom loves to tell. On the way home, my dad cracked. Constant pressure about make-believe cats. Poor guy had had enough. He began whacking his hands on the steering wheel and yelling, "You want a cat? We'll get a cat, god damn!" and drove to the shelter on the outskirts of town. So we go into the cat room, and without pause, I head straight to the cage in the middle of the row, point and say, "Yep, there's Silly." There in the cage was a Siamese cat named Cicely, who stayed with us for 16 years. My dad built a little wooden shrine in the flower garden when she passed and didn't stop moping for months. I was walking home from a pub in the city where I saw a car pull up next to a very, very drunk girl who was sitting in the gutter. Something just didn't feel right about the situation, so I walked over just as she was getting into the car and asked her if she was okay. I was at the passenger side with the door open, and the girl leaning in talking to the driver as he was telling her to get in the car. He kept saying he was a taxi, urging her to get in the car. When he started reaching for her to pull her in, I looked at him, and he was sweating and staring at me. He looked me in the eye and said, "I am taxi." That's when I noticed that there were two other men in the back seat of his car, all staring at me and the girl. The driver got a hold of the girl and started to pull her into the car when I grabbed her and told her he wasn't a taxi. All the while, he's got this crazed look in his eyes and he just kept saying, "I am taxi," over and over again. I took the girl away from the car and the men started to speak in a foreign language and then began to shout at me. I told the girl I will call her a taxi, but that car wasn't a taxi. It had no radio, meter, markings, license, etc., plus there were two men in the back. The facts seemed to dawn on her and sober her up. The men in the car drove off when I took a picture of their license plate and tried to get a picture of them. When I was 12, I was on an overnight train in India with my parents and brother. I had an upper bunk bed and my dad slept on the lower bunk. My brother and mom were in a different compartment. In the middle of the night, I feel a heavy weight on me and wake up momentarily, thinking my brother had gotten scared and wanted to sleep with me. I went back to sleep and woke up a few seconds later, fully alert, sat up and screamed because there was a fully grown man on top of me. Immediately, he got off of me and ran away. I went down to the bottom bunk where my dad was sleeping. He's a heavy sleeper. Told him what had happened and slept with him for the rest of the night. I laid in bed and listened as someone tried to break into my apartment. This was before cell phones, and I didn't have a landline. It was a 3-month sublet before I left for college. The roommate I was supposed to live with moved out 3 days after I moved in because someone had broken in and tried to R her. Forgot why he didn't succeed. Maybe she screamed and he noped out. In the morning I found several screens slit. Of course, I had locked all the windows before bed. I've never been so terrified. Another creepy thing, I was hitchhiking in the 70s, and this guy passed the intersection that was my destination. I'd look over at the guy and state the obvious. Apparently, this little troll didn't want to let me out of his car, so I told him I'd grab the wheel and slam his car into the next telephone pole if he didn't stop. He did. My father told my family this story a few years ago, and refuses to talk further about it since. So my dad recently got out of the army. The Vietnam War ended and he never shipped out. He's driving eastbound late one night on some F-all interstate, can't remember which one, and he's the only car for miles around. Suddenly out of nowhere a semi, at time DC, speeds from behind him, pulls around his left side and merges in front of him with 4 black trucks in tow. This was back when civilian band CB radios were still in wide usage. So my dad gets on his CB, turned to channel 19, pretty much the B/ of CB radio channels in terms of it was used for idle shit shooting, and hails the semi once. "How about that time DC truck? What are you all hauling and where to?" Normally the trucker would respond to this question with an appropriate answer. It's not unusual to get asked what you're hauling if you're the second only truck out of F all hours of the night. Anyway, Dad hails the truck once, yeah, no answer. Hails twice, no answer. Hails third time, and midway gets cut off by some creepy voice modulator affected speaker saying something along the lines of, "You leave that time DC truck alone." Remember how there were black trucks escorting that semi? Yeah, that was them. Needless to say, this spooked my dad pretty good, and he shut up for the rest of the night and let them go about their business.